Everybody and their grandmother has been trying to find the one gene for pancreatic cancer, the one gene for acute myeloid leukemia. It turns out that unfortunately for all other cancers, most of them really, there are too many genes that are mutated simultaneously. And so the targeted therapies we developed, even for those multiple proteins or one protein that is dominant, it turns out it works for a little bit. So let me give you some statistics again. 95% of the new drugs that we are bringing, the experimental drugs we bring to the bedside, 95% of them fail. And to bring one of those drugs to the bedside is $1 billion almost. So imagine how much we are losing. 5% that succeed should have failed, in my opinion. Why? Because they're only prolonging survival by a few months. So, for example, there's a drug that extends the life of a pancreatic cancer patient by 12 days at the cost of $26,000 a year. And not every pancreatic cancer patient, just a fraction. So think of the financial toxicity we are causing to these patients now. For very little prolongation in survival, we are financially ruining 42% of cancer patients newly diagnosed with cancer today. By year 2, they lose every penny of their life savings.
Speaking of which, before we go on to the incredible stories you describe in The First Cell, your thoughts on Medicare for All. I have spent a lot of time accompanying family and friends, for example, at Sloan Kettering, who are dealing with cancer. The astounding devastation of people's, aside from lives, financial destruction. Medicare for All, what would that mean for cancer patients?
Amy, while I'm not an expert on these issues, I have common sense. And one thing I can say is that the current situation is completely untenable. We are on the verge of a collapse with the healthcare system. We can't continue it the way it is going. And to me, the only solution seems to be, but again, it's not speaking as an expert, is to have Medicare available for everybody. I think that's the only compassionate and humane solution.
Well, Azraba, I want to ask you about another incident that you mention in the book before going on to the longer case histories of patients in their own words as well as in the words of their family members. I mean, the cost of cancer treatment, as you say, in the U.S. is exorbitant, and many families have been driven to financial ruin. But what about in places where cancer treatment is so prohibitive that it entirely deprives patients of access? You talk about arriving in Karachi and meeting in Karachi, Pakistan, which is where you're from, and talking to Zainab, a cancer patient about whom you write, quote, "How does one go in and talk to a 35-year-old woman for whom dying from leukemia is only her second biggest problem?" Could you talk about that, access to cancer treatment, and who the people are who are entirely deprived of any treatment at all?
This is a subject which is very close to my heart, Nermeen, because obviously I am from that part of the world. The entire world looks to America for leadership. What kind of leadership are we providing? A leadership where we are developing drugs or cellular therapies now that will cost over $1 million per patient for helping very few patients. These are rarefied cases for whom this kind of treatment will work. As you said, what about the 20 million new cancer patients being diagnosed universally all around the world? We just don't have a compassionate solution for them. Why aren't we thinking not just of those, even in America, in the remote areas and many places where healthcare is becoming harder and harder to access just because hospitals are closing down from financial ruin themselves. Why aren't we thinking of them? Why aren't we thinking beyond American borders for humanity as a whole? And when you think about that solution, I mean, you don't have to be a genius. No, look, the only thing that works in cancer, if you have someone who gets diagnosed with cancer, the first thing you'll say is, was it advanced or was it caught early? No, early, so there's hope. We know that early detection helps, right? Why are we investing money in chasing down the last cell with drugs which have a 95% failure rate today? Because the preclinical testing platforms we are using are so artificial, and that's why we are bringing up drugs that are not going to be successful. Instead of doing that, why aren't we simply improving on the techniques we know worked? What worked? Early detection. How do you do early detection? Well, mammography, colonoscopy, pap smear, etc. has been reached to their maximal limits. Let's develop the new technology so that from one drop of blood, you can put it on a little chip which can be read by a cell phone, which costs $180 for 12 cancers to be diagnosed early. This is something that was just announced by a Japanese company. So these are things not that are a pie in the sky. These are things that are happening now. Except how fast will it happen to reach the rest of the world? It depends on the amount of resources we invest.